GearNetwork.com.
The following is a presentation of the Gear Radio Network.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I believe it's a big challenge for our building to keep things in perspective and to, if we're going to get addicted to anything, let's get addicted to the process.
And with that, we welcome you to Trust the Podcast, powered by Better Live Than Dead and the Gear Radio Network. This is episode 129.
Episode 129, peoples. We said we were going to come back. Did not realize it would be so soon, right, Ryan?
I mean, that was the rundown that I wrote here on the podcast. I see you've got the notes popped up. If you don't, you do. I was going to say, if not, you did your homework either way. Very pleased with that. This one here is called the Contract Extension Cast, taking a page out of the book of the Better Live Than Dead podcast and giving a podcast title a cute name. Maybe people will love that just a little more. But hey, before we get started, you can hear us on BetterLiveThanDead.com, GearNetwork.com, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Make sure also to hit that subscribe button as well to stay up to date in the latest podcast. Now, during the off season, that's very important because we kind of sporadically podcast. During the season, it's still important, but you know, we're here every single week, and we being myself, Ryan Wolfe at Wolfe BLTD, and John, my co-host at I Am JC Money. John, buddy, how you doing?
I am doing well and much better now with the new sound equipment that I have here, and hopefully it translates very well once we release the audio. I was not a big fan of how I sounded last podcast, although I was a big fan of last podcast we did. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, hey,
I dare say it almost motivated me to make sure, like, to ensure that I had top-notch stuff for podcast season once the season officially begins.
And that's true too. And you're pushing me to potentially get some new equipment as well, just because my board breaking on the fourth wall, my plug broke. And it's kind of held together by
duct tape and Robitussin.
By duct tape, Robitussin. I was gonna say hopes and dreams at this point, but yes, it's
thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, that seems fair. At this point, so it's like, you know, I have to unplug it after I use it because it could potentially cause a fire. So we're living life on the wild side.
Living on the edge over there at Casa de Wolf.
Yeah, the Wolf Den Studios here. Now, John, we talked about it last week, a couple weeks ago. It was very recent. We talked about it. That Sean McDermott, now we weren't saying he was on the hot seat. We were just saying that when you start to put your name on more things, the pressure tends to heighten a little. The light tends to get a little brighter. Sun gets a little hotter.
Absolutely.
With that being said, though, on
days later,
on June 23rd at 10 a.m., this tweet went out from the Buffalo Bills PR account, official PR account on Twitter. Quote, the at Buffalo Bills have extended the contracts of head coach Sean McDermott and general manager Brandon Beane through 2027. So all of I wouldn't even say it was baseless speculation because, again, we'll talk about this in just a minute here, but there are some cracks. There not were some cracks. There are some potential cracks in the foundation of what has been built in Buffalo. And before we go too far into it, I just want to say too, I don't think that Bills fans or Buffalo sports fans, for that matter, overreact a ton. I mean, there are some people out there who do it for the engagement, which is, you know, horrible. But I tend to think that Buffalo sports fans are relatively smart because of all the crap that that us fans collectively have been through, whether it's the Bills, the Sabres, I mean, really the Bills and the Sabres, because the other, you know, the basketball team went away a long time ago. The lacrosse team is the Buffalo Bandits are very good, defending, you know, just won the championship, defending NLL champions there. So it's really just the Bills and the Sabres have kind of, you take like an old leather wallet and it's all beaten in and it's all creased out and it just fits well. It's kind of what the fan base is, because they've just been weathered over the years and kind of been through it all. So when things start to go good, people pay attention to the bad. And that's, I mean, as expected, but I want to get into our three big things here, John, because we're going to kind of break it down from the top down here. As always, our three big things brought to you by puckluck.com, your one-stop resource for all your National Hockey League sports betting action. Puck Luck provides win percentages and score projections for each and every National Hockey League game to tilt the ice in your favor. Not sure what to bet or just in a rut? Not to worry. Puck Luck also provides expert picks to get the puck bouncing your way. Please note, though, puckluck.com is no way affiliated with the National Hockey League, its teams, or the NHLPA. Puckluck.com provides data related to gambling and cannot guarantee the success of any suggested or related wagers. As always, please gamble responsibly. Now, John, how did we get here? We're going to talk about Brandon Beane first. We'll move over to Sean McDermott. How we're going to do this, our first of the three big things will be about Brandon Beane. Our second of the three big things will be about Sean McDermott. And then our third of the three big things, we're going to let it all hang out. We're going to tell everybody how we really feel about these decisions here. But first, John, I think even though you are a Jets fan, you are Bills Mafia's favorite Jets fan, so aptly termed, I think it's safe to say you can agree, since being named the Buffalo Bills general manager on May 9th, 2017, Brandon Beane has worked tirelessly to put his stamp on this Buffalo Bills roster and Buffalo Bills franchise as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at just the body of work, and keep in mind, you can use this very podcast as kind of a timeline with how we got here as well, believe it or not, because this podcast started in year one of the Brandon Beane era. And we were chatting at that time, you and Dell, but also loosely me within there about, the fans giving the process the chance, and the culture giving the chance for the culture to start kind of weaving and becoming something big. And, Bills fans, to your point a few minutes ago, they're weathered. They've been beaten. They had years, 17 of them, prior to the Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott era, where they were either close but no cigar, or not close at all, right? So since that point in time, I mean, you've got and I know, and I won't give up the boss on what you've written a little farther down in the notes here, because you've articulated it very well, but I mean, since 2017, you're looking at a group of people, a general manager that hired a head coach in Sean McDermott that has a .639 win-loss percentage. 62-35 is the McDermott record. And a lot of that is because of the smart drafting and the strategic moves that Brandon Beane has made in conjunction with Sean McDermott and his coaching, as well as his staff. I mean, it's been 6 years now, going on year number 7, and it's still like you've got plenty of years to go. And this is definitely a really good era of Buffalo Bills football.
I absolutely agree with that one. I mean, at this point in time, it's you're going to be hard pressed to find a lot of people upset about Brandon Beane being extended. I mean, he's responsible for building rosters that have produced 5 playoff appearances, including 3 consecutive AFC East Division championships from 2020 to 2022. Mm-hmm. He was responsible for drafting Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds, Ed Oliver, Dawson Knox, Gabe Davis, Tyler Bass, Greg Rousseau, Kyer Elam, James Cook, and then recently Dalton Kincaid and Osiris Torrance, among others.
And these are all names. Every single one of those names that you mentioned, they're names. Like, everybody knows who they are. Obviously, Josh Allen, but I mean, Trey Edmonds, Ed Oliver, Knox, Gabe Davis, everybody knows who these people are, like, nationally. Yeah. It's not just a regionalized thing anymore. And that is, again, smart draft picking, smart moves made from Brandon Beane, very clearly a smart general manager.
My microphone just took a dive there really quick. I don't know what's going on with that. So, John, it's very difficult to find a general manager who aces every trade that they make, right? Right. Brandon Beane has had his hits. He's had his successes and failures, just like everyone does. Not everybody's playing Madden on rookie mode like your boy does. But the Bills traded Marcel Darius, to the Jacksonville Jaguars way back when for a 5th-round pick. That became All-Pro guard Wyatt Teller. Now, granted, as you can tell, Wyatt Teller's not a Buffalo Bill anymore. He was a Buffalo Bill for 1 season. And then Brandon Beane, in what could have arguably been one of his worst trades, traded Wyatt Teller and a 7th-round pick, which Green Bay ended up with that pick selecting free safety Vernon Scott. They traded him to the Cleveland Browns. He became an all-pro guard for the Cleveland Browns, but not trying to pump any tires here, John. But looking at the statistics and looking at the information that we have in front of us, traded Wyatt Teller for a 5th-round pick that was used later in the Stephon Diggs trade, and a 6th-round pick that the Bills used to select Tyler Bass. So
it's quite interesting how it all works out in the end.
It kind of washes out. Yeah, exactly.
But
exactly.
it's still, you look at it from the perspective of, what you gave up at the time, right? Yep. And maybe at the time it sounded like a dumb thing, but then, to end up somehow weaving that into acquiring Diggs and Tyler Bass, I mean, it ultimately worked out for them in the end there. So, and keep in mind too, the date that you have it listed here too, August 29th was when he traded them. It was right after the only losing season in this era. The 2018 season, the Buffalo Bills finished 6-10 that year. This trade happened right after that year, where they ended up rebounding back and went 10-6.
Now, granted, too, there were a lot of movements. So it's kind of revisionist history here. So I'm not trying to go too hard one way or the other, but just trying to point out that he has done some very, very, very big things for this organization. April 24th, 2018, Brandon Beane traded a 2018 first-round pick, number 12 overall, obtained from the Bengals, which the Buccaneers ended up with the pick. They drafted Vita Vea, very good player, and 2 second-round picks. It was 53rd overall, cornerback MJ Stewart, and 56th overall, obtained from the Los Angeles Rams. The Patriots ended up with that pick. They selected cornerback Duke Dawson. All of that went to Tampa Bay for a first-round pick, 7th overall, used to select Josh Allen, and a 7th-round pick, number 255, used to select wide receiver Austin Proehl. Another big pick, a same day, actually, earlier in the day, to get down to that point. They traded a first-round pick, number 22, from the Chiefs. Tennessee ends up with that pick. They pick linebacker Rashaan Evans, and a 3rd-round pick, 65th overall, obtained from the Browns. The Raiders end up with that pick. They select offensive tackle Brandon Parker to the Ravens. That they get they get a first round pick, 16th overall, selected linebacker Tremaine Edmonds, and a 5th-round pick selected Saran Neal, cornerback, defensive back, 154 overall. Sorry, my brain just stopped working there for a second. There will be a quiz at the end of this, by the way, John, as well. But again, making moves to find.
Well, if there is, I have the cheat sheet in front of me here, so
exactly, I like
I'm
that.
good.
Open book test.
I'm good to get a nice solid 20%.
I love that. I love that. So again, the thing about Brandon Beane has always been, and again, another trade that has not yet really paid dividends because we didn't really see what the Bills want to do with him yet. But November 1st, 2022, they trade Zach Moss and a 5th-round pick, which became tight end Will Mallory for the Indianapolis Colts. They get Nyheim Hines from the Indianapolis Colts. And again, Nyheim Hines had that incredible kickoff return for a touchdown against the Patriots the game after Damar Hamlin went down. But really, aside from that, it's still hard to see what that move is going to be for the Buffalo Bills. But again, you can't discredit Brandon Beane for being a guy who locks in and knows, hey, we need a guy like Tremaine Edmonds on our defense. Now, granted, he went and signed a massive deal with the Chicago Bears, which he rightfully so. Those are those situations where, again, and this was not in the notes here, but this is just kind of something that I'm spitballing here in my head, is looking at it. You have a general manager who's able to look out and recognize the talent that they need for their defense, for their team, for their leadership group. They go out and get Tremaine Edmonds. He develops into a great leader. I would not necessarily say, because again, Buffalo fans much harder on themselves than they need to be. It's kind of like when, a semi good looking guy gets with a really pretty girl and he's like, well, I'm just not good enough. That's kind of how it feels all the time. You're always looking for those flaws. Tremaine Edmonds wasn't terrible. He was not.
When you have a large period of time where all you're accustomed to is seeing those flaws and those weird things, it's kind of hard to get. PTSD is very real. Yeah. Regardless of whether, whatever it might be, if you're impacted greatly by something, there is a degree of PTSD acquired from that. And Bills fans are used to it. Jets fans, I can speak on behalf of Jets fans. I mean, we haven't had a 4,000 yard passer since Joe Namath. I mean, That was a long time ago. It was like 1971, I think, was when that season happened. It might have even been earlier than that. So we get it. There's PTSD when it comes to those types of things. So it's tough. It's easy for an outsider to say, "Oh, come on, you guys have won five out of the last 6 years, likely 6 out of the last 7, right? When this season is done." But still, it's tough to, get past the whole, yeah, but when is it going to happen? When is the crash going to happen kind of thing? But back to, just all of that, all that aside, everything that you've mentioned here, there's one big thing too about Brandon Beane that I think gets overlooked is that for all of these different picks that he's doing, he's not afraid to make a mistake. It seems he's not afraid to make a move that may not necessarily be the most popular. I think it's more like there are those GMs that will listen to those armchair quarterback fan base, right? If the fan base is griping and complaining and whatever, sometimes ownership or the general manager will sign whatever, throw back up the Brinks truck for whatever athlete they want, right? That their fan base wants, whether or not it's a fit for the team. Brandon Beane doesn't seem afraid to go against the grain in order to make sure that the nucleus of this team is still cohesive every year. That's just my observation there. I don't know if you agree with that as well.
No, I would agree with that for sure. I mean, again, like you said, they call him Big Baller Beane for a reason. He goes out, they recognize they need a number 1 wide receiver. They go out, they acquire Stephon Diggs. Since joining Buffalo in 49 games, he's had 338 receptions. That's tied for first in that time frame with Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver Devontae Adams. Right. He's had 484 targets. His 4,189 yards rank 4th in that time frame, and his 29 touchdowns rank 6th in that time frame. I mean, Brandon Beane went out and signed Cole Beasley, Mitch Morse, John Brown, Daquan Jones, Tim Settle, got Von Miller, recently picked up Connor McGovern from the Cowboys, Taylor Rapp from the Rams, and Poona Ford from the Seahawks. I mean, he's not afraid to recognize those gaps and then try to fill them
absolutely
appropriately.
Unlike his predecessor, Doug Whaley, whom was Brandon Beane in reverse. So
now, granted, some people may argue that they are a little slow to pull the trigger on these things, but also in the same aspect, in the same breath, thought process, whatever you want to say, it's not that easy to just say, yeah, well, we need to go out and get a stud pass rusher, so let's just go sign one or let's just go trade for one, because again, it takes 2 to tango. So at this point, I think Brandon Beane continues to make the best out of a very good situation here in Buffalo. Which brings me to the second of the 3 big things here, John, the more of the lightning rod of the 2 here. Sean McDermott. How did we get here with Sean McDermott? Now, since being named the head coach of the Buffalo Bills on January 11th, 2017, McDermott has led the Bills to 5 playoff appearances in his first 6 seasons. And arguably that one year that they missed, I think everybody was comfortably aware that the goal was to get one of those top quarterbacks in the draft coming up, when there were a bevy of quarterbacks available in the Josh Allen draft. Culture is a coaching buzzword to use, and I know we get sick of hearing about it, but again, just like Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott has transformed the culture on the field, in the locker room in Buffalo. McDermott is first in win percentage in Buffalo history, 3rd in wins behind only Lou Saban, who has 70, Marv Levy, who has 123. Buffalo has won 3 straight AFC East titles, the first time the franchise has accomplished this since 1988 to 91. Buffalo joins only Kansas City as the only 2 teams in the National Football League to win 10-plus games and earn a playoff berth in each season from 2019 to 2022. Buffalo's offense has averaged 23.9 points per game in McDermott's 6 seasons, including 28.4 or more points per game in each of the last 3 seasons. Buffalo's defense has allowed 20.05 points per game in McDermott's 6 seasons, including an average of 17.45 points per game in the last 2 years. McDermott has helped coach and develop cornerback Tre'Davious White, wide receiver Stephon Diggs, quarterback Josh Allen, wide receiver Cole Beasley, return specialist Andre Roberts, free safety Jordan Poyer, strong safety Micah Hyde, and Matt Milano, linebacker, into all-pro players. Also, David Culley, a Buffalo quarterback coach from 2017 to 18, and Brian Daboll, Buffalo offensive coordinator from 2018 to 2021, are part of McDermott's coaching tree. Now, John,
incidentally, Brian Daboll, coach of the year last year. for the NFC with the Giants. So right
Well,
there, you're already seeing that tree kind of extend, and it's looking pretty good, especially for Brian Daboll going forward. That's a great stat to have and to hold there.
And that's going to bring me to our third of the three big things here. Our feelings about the deal. This has been termed an open segment for both Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. I think for me, we've already talked about Brandon Beane at length. I think both of us comfortably can say that was a very smart, no-brainer deal to keep Brandon Beane in Buffalo long term.
Yes, absolutely.
In terms of Sean McDermott, though, granted, the grass is not always greener. I understand that. But at what point, and again, the Bills could come out this season, win the Super Bowl, win 14 games, and all of this talk goes away. But judging based off of the information that we currently have and the information that we have going into next season. Now, granted, was the defense's inability to produce in the playoffs, was that a Leslie Frazier thing? Was that a Sean McDermott thing? We'll find out this season because Sean McDermott is going to be the defensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. So we'll see more about that. But in terms of the growth and development, you would hope that the Bills by this point, granted, we're playing against, the Buffalo Bills are playing against one of the greatest quarterbacks potentially of all time coming up in Patrick Mahomes. So you kind of have to get over that hump. But the Bills have no issue being a perennial playoff contender, making the playoffs without any issue. It's when it gets down to it and it gets down to you need to be able to outcoach another opponent, another head coach. It seems like Sean McDermott has struggled in those situations. Now, again, at the end of the day, if Leslie Frazier's calling the defensive play calls, could it fall on him? Sure. But at the end of the day, you're the head coach. You're the tip of the spear, if you will, and you're the one that's going to deflect all of the success downward. Where hey, Josh Allen had a great game today. Ken Dorsey called a fantastic game offensively. Awesome. But then on the flip side, if you have a bad game, it's on me. I didn't do a good enough job. And we've seen some cracks in that foundation. Perfect example being 13 seconds. We don't even have to explain what that means because everybody in Buffalo knows it at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, everybody in the world, around the world knows it too. 13 seconds became a thing.
Don't remind me. But that was one of those situations where Sean McDermott didn't really soak up the blame and kind of take one for the team and say, look, that was my bad. Mm-hmm. It was more of a deflection. And those are the small things that people start to see over time where it's like, okay.
But let me play devil's advocate there.
I was just going to say real quick. I'll just finish my sentence because I want to get your thoughts here. It's because I want to see how you feel about this idea. The grass is not always greener, but at what point have you gotten the most out of Sean McDermott as the Buffalo Bills head coach? That's what I'm starting to wonder is, have we seen the ceiling of Sean McDermott as a head coach with the Bills?
I don't know that we can comfortably answer that question, though, before this season because of all the changes that we made, kind of like what we talked about last week, Brian. Remember, we were talking about the added responsibility that McDermott has now with Leslie Frazier gone and him calling the defensive plays and all of the different coaching changes that were made. We're at that point now where he, as a leader, now has to understand that his team of leaders, I'm not talking about his physical football team that are on the field, but his team of leaders around him, his coaching staff, that's all different. So there's going to be some changes there. There's not going to be a whole lot of things that translate from the previous regime to this regime. So there's going to be some growing pains there. I think, again, touching up on the point now, although I'll walk back on where I said this might be a season where people may start to wonder, whether or not it's going to work out or if you've hit the wall with McDermott. I think this extension gives him at minimum 2 more years to figure it to make sure you guys have what's there. I don't know. I don't believe we covered it here. And I haven't seen the terms of the actual extension, the terms of the deal, but I'm curious as to when the early out could be, either for McDermott himself or the team, if we have hit the apex with McDermott, if they are perennial playoff, if he's the proverbial Buck Showalter, if you will, where he's always kind of close, but never getting over that hump, or Dusty Baker, until recently, Dusty Baker was always kind of the bridesmaid and never the bride. And then last year he finally, took the Astros over the hump, got his chip as a manager. I'm wondering if McDermott is like that, but I think that with the Buffalo Bills giving him the extension, he's built up enough equity to be truthful. He's built up enough equity to be given at least a couple of years to figure out how he works with all of this transition. Because when you're a good coach and you have a good system and you have 6 out of 6 years, one losing season, that's a sign for other teams to come in and poach. And so you knew that the turnover was eventually going to happen with the coaching staff with the Buffalo Bills. But the consistency, the model of consistency with the culture that McDermott has, I think we're going to know a lot about him and where he might be headed after this season. But I think Buffalo's given him a good 2 to 3 more years to make sure that they're, comfortable with that ongoing evolution.
Well, and I think too, it's something that has been pointed out by enough people on Twitter that there's no doubt about it that Terry Pegula is not afraid to pay money to people to not work for them any longer. Look at the Buffalo Sabres. They had a bevy of coaches, general managers, assistant coaches, internal staff, some players that they just said, look, just go away. Don't go away mad, just go away, essentially. Now, it feels ridiculous to have this conversation because as I'm looking, again, CBS Sports kind of humbles you very fast when it says here, during their 6 seasons at the helm, Buffalo has compiled a 62-35 record, made the playoffs 5 times. Their .639 win percentages during that stretch is the 3rd best in the NFL, behind only the Chiefs and Saints, while only 7 teams in the league have won more than their 4 playoff games. So it's, again, I think what we're trying to do is figure out exactly like where, how much is too much, how much is not enough. Because looking here, it says this article from Sports Illustrated, McDermott became the head coach in 2017, signed a 6-year extension in 2020, so to 2026. Originally set to end after 2025, the team has now added 2 more years to that deal, showing some more understandable confidence in the 49-year-old. So again, I get that they're showing the confidence, but it...
Well, they've always said, historically, they've always said a head coach really to get a system fully implemented. And we live in a very here now kind of world, right? Where we want everything immediately and not really let everything slow burn. But the trajectory for an NFL coach is that they typically need about 6 years in order to make sure that they're, they've kind of weaned out the previous regime.
Yep.
Start bringing in their own guys and create their own culture. So the Buffalo Bills have given Sean McDermott his 6 years, and in his 6 years to have that win percentage, 62 wins at 97 games. I mean, 639 average. And he's doing that where 17 years before that was not happening.
I mean, barring anything catastrophic this season with the Buffalo Bills, Sean McDermott will finish the 2023 NFL season as the 2nd winningest head coach in Buffalo Bills history. So again, looking at it on the surface, this sounds ridiculous.
It does sound ridiculous, but it's also kind of crazy when you think about how much time in between Saban and how much time there was between Saban and Levy and between Levy and McDermott now. Like, the Buffalo Bills are not a brand new franchise. They've been around for that many years. And to be kind of in that upper echelon says a lot about this current regime, but it also says a lot about the failures that have come in between and what the fan base has been accustomed to more often than not. This conversation, like you said, barring catastrophic destruction, something happens. To me, there's no way McDermott doesn't end up number 2 in wins. And passing Lou Saban by the end of this year. But it's very possible that they're giving him the opportunity to pass Levy in wins and he's got that opportunity now. He's got several more years to do it. But again, this season and next season in particular, because the Bills are a darling team now, and because you've got that coaching tree now that has produced an NFC head coach of the year, it's going to constantly be, they're going to constantly be looking to the Buffalo Bills. Other teams are going to be constantly looking to this organization, in addition to the Kansas Cities and the Cincinnatis of the world, to poach and try and build their product and their culture and do that. So how he adjusts this season will be a wake-up call for sure, because it's new, and they added responsibility. But then next year too, and how that goes, it's going to be very interesting to see. But as we've done over the course of this entire podcast life, Ryan, we've been along for every step of the way here. And I feel like every year it's like we're reaching uncharted waters, you know?
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool to see, but also if and when, because all things come to an end at some point, when this does, we can really look back and I think now understand what a winning culture to today's generation of Bills fans now understands now what it was like to have a great stretch of time, a great stretch of football, a great organization from top to bottom, that when this generation ends, when this run ends, Bills fans know what to look for. Ownership knows what to look for. So it's one of those things where this could be a culture of sustainable culture ongoing even beyond McDermott or Beane. Given the way things have been going and flowing for so long now.
Well, I think too, the difficult thing for Bills fans, at least from what I've seen too, is they see a guy like, my brain just stopped working there. Sorry. Brian Dable. They see a guy like Brian Dable come in, struggle, take his lumps, figure it out. And then all of a sudden the Buffalo Bills have an incredible offense under Brian Dable, and he's working well with Josh Allen. And then Brian Dable leaves, goes to the Giants, and continues to have success, while the Buffalo Bills, you would hope the offense would not turn into a pumpkin when facing the Chiefs and the Bengals. And it seems like every time, maybe not so much during the regular season, but definitely during the postseason, Sean McDermott and his coaching staff often find themselves being outcoached, where there's never an adjustment. It's always the team adjusting to the Bills just saying, well, we're just going to keep doing what we do.
Well, I feel like
I think that's where people get worried and say, okay, and again, this is probably ludicrous to say, but this is kind of the thought process from the inside looking out, is this franchise, is this organization, is this ownership group fine with being really good and sputtering out in the playoffs, or do they want more? And that's kind of the question with McDermott is there a next step where maybe him leading the defense is that next step? Maybe Ken Dorsey getting more comfortable as an offensive coordinator allows them to take that next step. We don't know, but those are kind of the storylines going into the season, because Josh Allen, knock on wood, as long as he stays healthy, Josh Allen's going to be Josh Allen. The defense, as long as they stay healthy, again, knock on wood, they'll be very good. It's just, can they be good enough to take that next step and beat the Kansas Cities and the Cincinnatis of the world to put themselves in the position to make the Super Bowl and potentially win the Super Bowl? Because right now, there's no doubt this team defensively, the Bills could make the playoffs just on their defense alone, in my humble opinion.
Absolutely.
Offense alone. They can make the playoffs just with this offense alone, my humble opinion. So again, it shouldn't be hard to get there. It's figuring out what you need to do to take that next step when you get there, and not being okay with just
there. Absolutely. And to your point again about some of the things that have happened, the 13 seconds and being out coached and things like that, I think with these, with being on so many primetime games and being in the playoffs so much, you acquire that experience. So eventually it shouldn't bother an individual anymore. The spotlight shouldn't be too bright because it's seemingly always on. certain teams. It's always on the Chiefs. It's always on the Bengals. It's always on the Bills now, especially. So I think going into this year, it will be very, very interesting to see how McDermott has learned from these lessons that he seems to keep running into when he gets to those points there and being out coached. I think, the 13-second game, that was kind of an anomaly. Like, that could have gone either way. But yes, he was absolutely out coached by Cincinnati last year. Like, there was they completely shut Buffalo down and just about every facet there. So now having those experiences with both of those respective organizations, if they're, and in all likelihood, they're going to be going, they'll be playing those guys again in the playoffs, right? You would have to think. I think now he's got the experience to having had those crushing situations to him where, you got to learn from it and you got a game plan for it. And then you're right. You have to kind of see where he ends up. And if it ends up being more of the same this year and again next year, then really that's when you start those chats about it. But, facing the Bengals the first time in the playoffs, Joe Cool is Joe Cool. Facing the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs is a very, very tough thing. And to be able to match them punch for punch in what still to me was one of the greatest football games I've ever seen in my life. That you got to give him some credit there, but that can't keep happening, right? Hey, if it happens again this year, okay. Now we start thinking more about it. It happens again next year in the playoffs. That's when we really start talking. Have we indeed hit our limit with McDermott and what's next? But that would be Brandon Beane's thing to figure out, not necessarily the ownership's.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think at some point, I think this year still is going to be very important for the development of Sean McDermott. And I say that because you have to always be developing, because if you're not, you're going to get left behind. So you always have to continue to try to get better. Now, granted, the Buffalo Bills, we talked about this last episode, John. The Buffalo Bills made a lot of very, very important moves, a lot of depth moves, a lot of moves to make sure that if Jordan Poyer gets hurt again, if Micah Hyde gets hurt again, if Von Miller gets hurt again, it's not just going to be, well, we're screwed. Because it honestly felt like most of the time last year it was, well, we're screwed. Josh Allen hurts his elbow, well, we're screwed. So it's a situation where you would hope that a light bulb would go off and he'd go, okay, this is what I have to do to get better here. Because again, it's situational coaching in the playoffs. It's not just, we're going to go run out and let Josh ball out. I mean, that might work, but then as you saw defensively, it wasn't working. So you have to be,
that can only work for a certain amount of time too. You can't let Josh ball out like that long term at all. He won't last to 2027 if they do that.
That's the thing that worries me, and I'm not going to sit here and, wax poetic and say, oh my God, you got to not let him run the ball or whatever. Like, you let him continue to do his thing, right? But at the age of 27, you look at it and you're like, all right, he's been in the league for what is it, 5 years now. So he's going on his 6th year. Okay, so how much longer can he continue to play that way? And are you wasting his prime? I think that's another thing that kind of scares Bills fans, because it has been so long since this team has been this good and had this talented of not only a team, but a quarterback. It's safe to worry about. I mean, I think going into the season, the Buffalo Bills have one of the best GM head coach pairings throughout the league. But I also think that the rumblings will get a lot louder if the Buffalo Bills do struggle this season, if the Buffalo Bills do not make it. I would say, I don't want to say it's Super Bowl or bust, but like at least to the AFC Championship game, things may get a little ugly in Buffalo quickly among the fan base if things don't improve.
I would absolutely agree with that. I don't have the Super Bowl or bust mantra now, like I did last podcast, where I was thinking that would have to be the minimum. At minimum, get to the Super Bowl and lose, right? With them extending them, that tells me that they have faith and confidence in him, that if it did not happen this year, it wouldn't be the end. But in the same, there can't be too many more opportunities where they don't get there. You know what I mean? Something is going to eventually have to give there, whether or not it's, get to a Super Bowl and lose, or get to a Super Bowl and win, or your apex is the divisional round. Like, you keep losing out, bottoming out in the divisional round. Again, I made a Buck Showalter reference earlier today, but that was kind of Buck's big thing, right? Where for a long time he had been, and particularly when he was the Yankees manager, he had all that talent and he brought them to the cusp of the playoffs. And then they get to the playoffs, but then they don't really do much in there. And that opened the door for Joe Torre, right? I hate to say that it could be that situation, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me if McDermott was the proverbial Buck Showalter in this case. I'm for your sake, I'm hoping not. For the sake of this podcast, I'm hoping not. But it'll be interesting to watch in the years to come.
I mean, looking just before we throw it to commercial break here and wrap this bad boy up, it's starting to look more and more like McDermott could be that guy that gets them to the doorstep, but can't get them in the door, can't get them into the house. Hopefully that changes this season. But again, you can only go 12-4, 13-3 so many times and lose out the first or second round of the playoffs before people start to question and wonder, is it time for a new set of eyes with this very talented roster? So with John, with that being said, we're going to take a quick commercial break and we will be back with more Trust the Podcast right after this quick commercial break. Trust the Podcast, as I said, here on the Gear Radio Network. And we're back here on Trust the Podcast. A little less clunky than I was going into the break, a little smoother here, John. But hey, it's our look ahead. Dates to watch. We've got training camp. It has officially been scheduled out. Hopefully you were able to get your tickets for camp practices. They are all ticketed this year. So that'll create some sort of crazy sort of buzz, which is always a lot of fun.
I'm going to be listening on the radio to try and win tickets.
Training camp begins on July 26th at St. John Fisher University in Rochester, New York. Check out buffalobills.com/training-camp. That's training -camp for more details. Bills got a handful of camp practices in Rochester. They have their return of the red and blue at Highmark Stadium. I believe they end up having 2 practices at Highmark, and then they open up the preseason against the Indianapolis Colts also at Highmark Stadium. So, John, my man, football is a month away. I mean, we're recording this on Monday evening. And training camp starts July 26th, and it is June 26th. Yeah. So,
wow, that's pretty crazy. And you know what? I would argue football for me hasn't necessarily really ended because I did have the spring games on and stuff through. I did watch the XFL, and very loosely watched the USFL. So there, I tried to do the whole football year round thing. I did end up, football fatigue is a real thing though. So I think I kind of end with XFL and would enjoy a nice break in between the end of the XFL season and the start of the NFL season. But yes, I mean, it's right around the corner. It'll be here before you know it. This year, honestly, the year 2023 in general, I feel is just flying by. I feel like it was January just a couple of weeks ago, but yeah, buddy, we're almost there. We still need to try and figure out which game we're going to go to, how we're going to try and get to that Broncos game if we want to indeed see Russ cook, because I am totally like all for wanting to go there and either lead or participate in some sort of Russell Wilson chant when they come to town. But I'm pretty excited, man. I'm pretty pumped and ready to go, and I love the fact that camp is here in Rochester. It's always a good time. It's always a good vibe around the area. And, again, when the Buffalo Bills are doing good, Western New York in general is a very, very good and welcoming and inviting place, especially during the football season when the weather tends to get quite gloomy. And as a writer would like to famously write, grim and depressing.
Yeah, you got that right.
So all good, man. I'm looking forward to it, and definitely want to try and get to one, if not more than one, game at the at Highmark before new stadium opens. So got to take in that experience of the long bathroom lines and the terrible toilets.
I like the way you put it. Yeah. And I was going to say, if nothing else, man, the exciting thing for me is that you sound so fresh, so clean, so crisp.
I love it. I cannot wait to hear this, man. I'm so pumped.
I'm pumped just listening to you talk to me this entire time. So I'm excited for you to hear it, but I'm excited for everybody else to hear it too. Yes, as always, we thank you for tuning in. We will definitely be back very soon with obviously the football season coming 1 month, starting 1 month from now with training camp. Hopefully have a couple in-person podcasts here coming up soon. I was able to see you and Mr. Perez over the weekend. I can confirm that the trio is still together and the vibes are still there and everything is still good.
Absolutely. Perez turned 40 this year, and actually it's 40 with 10 years experience. Actually, we'll give him the shout out today as part of this podcast because today is the actual day of birth. So happy birthday, Perez.
If you made it this far in the podcast, Mr. Perez, happy birthday. It's funny, John, I was talking to his dad over the weekend and his dad said, I've got a son that turns 50. What does that say about me? And I said, Mr. Perez, the real Mr. Mr. Perez. I said, Mr. Perez, I grew up watching him on TV. What do you think that says about him? And that got a pretty good pop. So,
indeed.
As always,
it's one of those random, I'll never get used to hearing that. Because now being back involved in pro wrestling, and when I see there are still people that are in the crowd that I remember being in the crowd when they were kids, and they're adults now with families of their own, and I remember them, in the crowd, and just they've watched me through the entire 23 years. They've been a fan of myself, my wrestling character, JC Money, and it's very weird. Still to me to hear someone saying basically what you just said about Perez, oh, I used to see you on TV, or I remember when you were wrestling in the old post office in the early 2000s. It's still kind of
1, 2, 3. Yeah, I was gonna say too, not to get all lovey-dovey here, but I must say too, out of your entire career, you are in the best shape of your life. That is no doubt about that.
No, I'm not. I'm knocking on wood, but yes, I am. I am definitely in the best shape of my life. I'm ready to go. July 8th. For those of you that are waiting for some hits and booms, bam, bops, and whips before the football season, I invite you all to Marketplace Mall July 8th for Upstate Pro Wrestling Red, White, and Bruised. Red, White, and Bruised, and just announced today I will be defending my Upstate Pro Wrestling No Limits Championship against Akasha Black with Frank the Tank Burlington, whom himself is the UPW Legacy Champion, as the guest referee. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun one. I got to slap around Akasha Black again and retain old Big Blue.
Sounds good. John is at I am JC Money. I am at Wolf BLTD. John, as always, we are Trust the Podcast.
You're not.
We appreciate you tuning in. We'll catch you sometime very soon. Next few weeks here, the Buffalo Bills are coming back, baby. As always, thanks for tuning in, and go Bills.
And I'm going to whoop your ass, Akasha Black. The preceding presentation has been brought to you by the Gear Network.